Hey everyone, this is Drew, or the Bearded Heathen. Today I have a guest speaker, Annie.
Hi.
So I will let you introduce yourself first, and then we'll just kind of have a conversation. So.
Okay. I'm Annie. I know Drew through mutual friends. Been really interested in his channel, and I recently started my own podcast, Brain Crumbs. Gonna plug that real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just have a lot of similar interests, and I think it'd be cool to just sit down and talk. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I know kind of vaguely where you stand on with regards to religion. This being a largely religion-based channel, I figured that's a good place to start.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm an atheist. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but I have a vague understanding of where you are, but I'll let you kind of describe that first.
Right. Well, for me, I grew up, my parents grew up and they went to church. Their parents made them go to church. So when we came along, they already decided they weren't going to do that. They wanted to let us explore it freely and make our own decisions on it. So we were never a religious household per se. Like, my mom identifies as like a very spiritual person, not in like the Crystal Healy kind of way, but into like she thinks she has like psychic abilities and used to do readings for people and that kind of thing. So when I was a kid, I had a friend who their family went to like Church of God. So being my friend, I wanted to go with her and see what that was about and explore it. And I realized really quickly that it wasn't the scene for me. I didn't identify with it. Didn't sit with me. And it's always sort of felt that way with any religion that I looked into or dabbled with. And I don't think I've ever reached a point where I could say that I'm like an absolute atheist, because I think that is, to say that you don't believe anything. You don't, until proven otherwise, there's just fucking nothing. And for me, it's, everything is too big and too wide and too unknown for me to conclusively say there's nothing out there. So I think agnostic, I guess, would be where I fall.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting that you say it that way, because that's kind of what I made that, atheist versus agnostic video about, was to talk about, to kind of get a better definition for those terms. Because I think a lot of people think that atheism is the I'm certain position, and that's not how I use it. I don't use it as in I'm certain that there's no God out there, or that there's nothing spiritual, there's no other dimensions or anything like that that we can experience. I'm just saying I don't know, but I don't see any reason to think that there is, so that's where I'm at.
Right. Okay.
And then, meaning, in saying that I don't know, that's kind of where the agnosticism comes in, because, I mean, how can you decisively prove that there isn't a God out there?
Right.
I don't think that you can, unless you knew everything about the universe, and obviously we fall very short of that.
Right, yeah.
Where we are right now. So, more of the agnostic side of things, just not sure. I guess the next question would be, have you ever had any experiences that have seemed kind of mystical or spiritual in any way?
I have, actually. On opposite ends of the spectrum, I've had experiences where I was like, okay, there obviously is something. Then I've had experiences where it's like, maybe there's not anything, and it sort of rattled me. I've had things happen where, granted, I've suffered with insomnia a long time. I'll go 3 nights without sleep, and that's where hallucinations start and stuff, But I remember being a young teenager and just sort of almost having this connection happen with everything and everyone. And it was sort of a really weird spiritual thing. And I remember seeing almost these gold strings of light that were connecting me and everything and everyone. And it was it was a really cool, surreal moment. And granted, it was, like I said, it was probably lack of sleep induced, and I sort of wrote it off as that. But in being young and trying to figure everything out and figure myself out, that was sort of a thing that just kept me in line with okay, there's something. And then not to get weirdly personal, but as I got older, as a young adult, I had attempted suicide, and it just, I remember this cold fear hitting me of what if there is nothing after this, and consciousness just stops, and that scared the shit out of me. And really made me want to explore that route as well, because I think it's so easy. First of all, if you grow up, I know you grew up in a religious home, it's easy to take it for granted that there is something after this, because it's it's what you've heard your whole life, and it's not until you get older and get out in the world that you realize, like, there's other options, there's other, explanations, but I think it's easy to just take it for granted that there is something after this, and I think it's human ego that wants to believe that, because obviously we're so important that our consciousness is going to go on elsewhere, but really sitting down and facing that hard truth of, like, there may not be anything. Consciousness just may stop, and that was like a cold, like, chill that went through me and made me, like, want to explore that route as well. So I've had it on both ends.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I know, I mean, in my circle, like, I know a few people in the area who are also atheists, and, we've talked about it a little bit, and then most of my interaction is just through watching YouTube videos, so there's not actually any interaction at all. I'm just listening to what somebody else is saying, but the whole there not being an afterlife thing is something that I don't think a lot of people really talk about, or if they do talk about it, they just kind of brush it off, or they say, it's not really something that I'm worried about. And I don't know, it's one of the things that I've had a lot of trouble dealing with myself. Cause like you said, I was raised religious, and I believed it for a long time. And I started questioning certain aspects of of Southern Baptist, as like a late high school and then early college age. I started questioning certain parts of it. And then I just kind of stopped, worrying about it for a while. And then it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 3.5, 4 years ago that I really started trying to find out information, everything that I could, and ended up, obviously, of course, leaving the religion. And the one thing that's, been the hardest thing to deal with, it has been the idea that, this is probably it.
Yeah.
It's a
hard pill to swallow.
It is, yeah. Just, I guess it's part of human nature to not be able to imagine not existing. I've heard some people say, well, do you remember what it was like before you were born?
Right, it's like that,
it's like
yeah.
that. It's like, well, and yes, it's like that in that I won't know anything about it anymore. But at the same time, I exist right now, and I don't want to not exist.
Right,
so
yeah.
It's a tough thing to think about. And then, there's just I'm going to miss out on so many cool video games and so many cool technological advances. And,
yeah.
Hopefully we'll see people go to explore other planets in our lifetimes. But I feel like that's a certainty once we get past, certain of those technological advances. And, I want to be around to see all of that. But
but given the opportunity, would you want to extend your lifespan by 300, 400 years? Would you want to be around for that, or?
I don't know. See, if just as that question, probably. Well, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. The idea of extending your life. Obviously, if I was the only one to be able to do that, then I'd have to deal with the fact that everyone that I know is going to die.
Ooh, yeah.
And then I'm going to meet a bunch of new people, and they're all going to die before I die. So,
right, yeah.
Dealing with that kind of pain of loss and all that is not something that I don't think anyone would look forward to. But if human life could be extended longer than it is now, which I think, with advances in medicine and, if we get stem cell research, to be able to grow back limbs or faulty organs or stuff like that, that would be a huge benefit. Cancer research, once we get some more answers there, it's going to be able to extend our lives a lot longer than we have right now. But yeah, I don't know. I would like to say yes, but I really don't know. It would depend a lot on the other circumstances of it.
That's true.
Yeah. Because, it's one thing to be able to see all of those things, but if nobody that I care about is there to share it with, especially if they're, only parts of the way there, have to share it with a new person every,
right.
50 or 80 years, that's
be like a weird vampire just walking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Because I think that's what's so scary about like just facing your own mortality is just knowing that it's going to end. You know what I'm saying? And I that's something I ponder a lot is if science came up with a magic pill that we could all take and I could live 400 years, I still don't know if I would want to. Because this is kind of like a fucking garbage fire right now, and I don't know if it's going to get any better.
Yeah. Yeah. If humans had a longer lifespan, would we have a longer time frame with which to like act on or like I don't know, a good example I guess of what I'm trying to say is the Dune series. I don't know if you've ever read those or
I'm familiar with them, but I haven't read them.
Yeah. So one of the things in the Dune series is that every society seems to have a really long view. So everybody's planning for things and doing things during their lifetime that are going to not have an effect until way, way down the line. And I wish that we could have that kind of a long view
can't
here.
relate.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, especially right now. I know a lot of people in this area are going to disagree, but it is tough to live in America and especially in Georgia.
Yeah, in the South,
with the political system the way that it is right now. Believing what I believe or what I don't believe. But
do you feel outcasted, or do you feel like you have a good network of people that you can like relate to?
Fortunately, my move away from religion was not the shock to the system that it could have been if I was under different circumstances. One of the videos that I've thought about making for a while is just kind of an update on my life since I made the first, coming out as an atheist video 3 years ago. And one of the things that I know I wanted to talk about was just the fact that when I first published that video, a lot of people watched it, but most of the, feedback that I got was very positive. A lot of people were saying, I've been asking some of these same kind of questions, and it's nice to know that I'm not the only one that's having, these kinds of issues, or even some people being like, I respect your, where you're at. Even though we don't agree, I hope we can still get along kind of things.
Right, yeah.
And I had a couple of conversations with some old friends that, we just kind of debated things back and forth in a very, friendly,
in a healthy way.
Yeah, in a very healthy way, which has been really nice. And I've had, long discussions with friends from college and friends from before college, where we've talked about philosophy and religion and stuff like that. And all of those conversations have just been super interesting. Right. I've never once felt like I was, being overbearing or mean, or I didn't get a reaction from them that said, you're kind of crossing the line here. So I'm hoping that I'm reading those talks right. But overall, I've felt, mostly just kind of left alone about it, which is nice in the South. But one of the things that's helped is I'm a musician, and musicians in general are a little bit more liberal leaning. So right. A lot of my social, beliefs are supported by a lot of the people that I'm around, which is really nice, because a lot of the problems that people have with religion, specifically like Christianity and Southern Baptist Christianity, is the hate on the LGBT community. Right. And growing up, of course, I was always taught, if this is a sin, this is wrong what they're doing. I didn't. It wasn't until I actually met people in high school who were gay and or trans or anywhere on the spectrum that I was really like, oh, they're just normal people. They're just
right.
Like, this dude likes other dudes, so it's like,
yeah,
that's it. That's the only difference between him and me. And they're like,
Satan worshiping.
Yeah,
like,
no, it's not. It's not like. Somebody who is gay is not the same as someone who runs around murdering and killing, people or stealing or, it's not, it's, it's just, that's who they are. They are physically repulsed by the people of the opposite sex, the way that I would not want to enter into a sexual relationship with someone of the same sex. Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And once I realized that, I was like, well, it's not a choice. So how do I explain this? And I didn't think about it again for a long time. Religion wasn't a big concern for me throughout most of college, really. And then it just kind of became a big deal. I don't know. I guess the big catalyst was I don't know if you've seen the Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate. I probably wouldn't recommend it because it gets hard to watch in some spots, particularly because of Ken Ham. But I always grew up as a big Bill Nye the Science Guy fan. Like, I loved watching the show.
Oh yeah, everyone in our generation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a really great show. I just remember, anytime that they would talk about the dinosaurs living millions and millions of years ago, my dad would always be like, well, it wasn't actually millions of years ago. They're just making that stuff up. Or if they talked about evolution, he's like, well, evolution's not really real. That's just, what they're trying to get you to believe. And I was like, why is it just this one thing in all of science that they have such a big problem with? And I think it is in large part that it removes the necessity for there to be a creator that created all animals distinctly, like it describes in Genesis. And that, if we didn't need somebody to create humans, if we came about naturally, then, our ultimate purpose and the ability that we have to do something that would, go against the laws of, God, that whole thing is kind of put into question that way. So I understand why it's a big issue for Christians. Not to say that it's a big issue with all Christians. It's a lot of Christians that I know, of course, accept evolution as a scientific theory, and get along just fine. But I understand why it can be a big stumbling block for a lot of Christians, because it does take away a lot of the things that they were told about their God. And
well, I feel like for a lot of people, it just once that first brick in the foundation starts to crumble, it all falls apart, So I could see where a lot of people who are devoutly religious would want to reject that immediately, because you don't want to start poking holes in the plot,
Yeah, and growing up, I was told that everything in the Bible is 100% true. There's no problems. If the Bible says something, then that's accurate. And it wasn't until after I watched that debate, I started watching a bunch of other YouTubers, talk about the debate, and then I started watching other videos on their channels, and it just kind of led to this whole thing. Realizing over time this, the Bible's not accurate. It's definitely not 100% accurate.
See, it's weird.
So trying to find a way to make it work,
yeah,
that was the next step. But then it just kind of all fell apart.
Yeah,
after that.
It's weird to me to think about, because even growing up in our household, to me, in our family, the Bible was always presented as, this is an absolute fact. This is a loose, these are metaphors. This is to just sort of wrap up the idea that they're trying to present, don't do this because this will happen, whatever. It's a storybook, really.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until later that I had started meeting devoutly religious people that I realized that they take it very literally.
Yeah.
There was a talking snake and there was a flood, and and it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that you could believe that but not evolution, you know. Not to stomp on anyone or anything, but
yeah.
But it's just it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, especially now as an outsider looking in, it's weird to think about all of the crazy stories in the Bible, like a talking donkey and a talking snake, and the people that were interacting with these talking animals, they were just okay,
yeah, this is
happening.
Yeah.
Nobody once was this is crazy,
right.
In the stories, and it's oh yeah, that's because it's a story. That's and then so if I had been taught the way that you were taught, that the Bible is mostly allegory and metaphor and just kind of parables, I don't know, it may have changed things, because the first brick that got pulled out of my wall was realizing that the Bible is not 100% accurate, and then trying to reconcile that. And then now I look at like people talk like Bart Ehrman is I really like his work. He's a Bible historian. Like he's a New Testament scholar, and just listening to him talk about where all the books in the New Testament came from, their individual histories, and of course all of the books that didn't get into the New Testament, like why did they not make it, and who decided, and when all of this happened. Because it's interesting. I'm reading a book right now about all of the books that didn't make it into the New Testament, but that were considered, at least by certain sects, as this is the way that you should believe. This is what you should believe in order to be a Christian. And some of them are like a little different. Some of them aren't that different at all from what we have. Some of them believe totally ridiculous things when you look at it from the inside Christianity. Like, are there 2 gods? Are there 12 gods? Like, these are things that early Christians believed because their holy books at the time, the ones that were written around when these other books were written, that's what they said. And it's like, that's a ridiculous thing to believe. But we're coming, 2 millennia later and having to interpret it. And it's pretty crazy. Really interesting to see, and then the fact that the first person to mention the 27 books of the New Testament, and only those, as this should probably be what we canonize, wasn't until like 367 AD, something like that. So almost, it was 330 some odd years after Jesus died that somebody was like, these are the books that should be in the New Testament. Like, it took that long to get all of these things and to, go through the different, theological battles that had to happen. It's like, it's because it wasn't just these 27 books. These 27 books didn't just happen right after Jesus died. It took a long time for them to be written, and then it took an even longer time for the people in the churches to, decide this one's a heresy and this one's scripture,
Right.
And it wasn't arbitrary. I'm not trying to say that it was arbitrary, but it's just interesting now as an outsider looking in to see how all of that came to be.
That whole system in itself is, that is sort of in itself pulling bricks out for me of the foundation. The fact, because I get that the whole thing, the Bible in itself is the Word of God, right? But you have this system of people who are distributing it and controlling what's coming in and out, and that never raised any red flags, Like...
Yeah, I think that it would probably raise red flags if you knew about it, but I didn't know about it.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And it wasn't even until after I had already stopped believing in the Bible that I started looking into how the Bible was put together.
Right.
And I'm still looking into that. It's a fascinating subject for me as someone who believed it for such a long time, because this isn't news for the most part. Some of the texts that they've found have been found within the last 100 years, but this isn't new. We've known about these things. It's just a matter of, do you want to look that up?
Right.
It's strange. It's not something that a pastor is going to teach about from the pulpit. It's going to be, his stuff's going to be more theological and, how you live your life according to what is in the Bible. He's not going to teach you that, the Gospels weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're anonymous. We don't know who wrote them.
Right. Yeah.
Things like that. Like, that's counterproductive to what they're trying to do. And then, he would have to go into, he would have to essentially teach college classes, for his congregation at that point. And that just it's not feasible. But yeah, that's kind of where I have gone, the past few years for sure. Just trying to find out more information, just because as a passion. It's not a thing that I plan to do anything with. It's just interesting to me. And then doing the YouTube channel here, I get to talk about it because it's not something that I can just bring up,
Right,
in a normal setting. So it's nice to have an outlet for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's so cool about, like, especially you in particular, and I'm sure, like, a lot of people in your social circle, is that where you made the coming out video and sort of were, like, braced for whatever may come from that, from being in this area, and it's, it's conservative, it's religious, I think we're to such a point now, and I'm sure social media has played a factor in it, because we have outlets to so many different ideas and things,
Mm-hmm.
to where it's unless, and there's extremists, but be it a Christian or an atheist or whatever, there's assholes in every group, but unless you're that guy that's coming out and you're like, no, you're wrong, God isn't real, I feel like nowadays it's pretty generally accepted, like, you know what I mean? No one's gonna be like, oh, he's an atheist, I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, it's few and far between for sure. I mean, I have had like one or two times where it's just been like, oh, like I had I was part of the Secular Student Alliance at Georgia Southern while I was in grad school, and they just met like one night a week for a couple hours and just talked about whatever. There's only a group of like 10 that met regularly, 20 maybe on big nights, and then we would have an event each year where it was Ask an Atheist Day. It's a national day, but we would have, usually we would have guest speakers. Sometimes we would just have a panel of a few of us up on, on a table, that anyone could come in. We would invite a bunch of the local campus religious groups to come in, and if they just had questions for us, they'd ask us, and we would answer them right then and there. One of those events, I posted some flyers in the music building, and I remember somebody came up and was just like, "Ask an atheist? What is that?" And I was just like, "I'm in the music building. Like, it's a little strange to hear this in the music building." That somebody would see a different point of view and react and discuss that way. I'm glad I was there to see it, because it was interesting to see. But, it's just like, oh yeah, I put that flyer there. Do you have any questions,
Come to the event, we'll be there.
Yeah, it's like, I'm more than happy to answer them. And in large part, that's why I wanted to create the channel, is because, particularly in the South, there are a lot of people, usually not that I run into on a daily basis, but there are a lot of people out there that have an extremely negative view of what it means to be an atheist. And I really want to clear the air a little bit and just help people understand that I'm not, a baby-eating monster. I rejected God so that I could go around sinning all day. That's not why I did it. That's not even a part of it,
Yeah. Just a normal guy.
Yeah, I'm just a normal person. I just don't believe in anything supernatural until you can prove it to me. If you can prove it to me, then by all means do that. And this could go back to that question you asked earlier about if you could extend your life, or because like believing in an afterlife, believing that I'll exist forever and be able to see everything happen in the universe and be able to, always be interacting with, the people around me. That's something that, I don't look forward to not existing. If there's a way that I can exist forever, that would, and everyone can exist forever. Yeah. Let me know about it, because that would be really cool. I haven't seen any reason to think that there is anything like that out there. So, that part has been kind of tough. But other than that, I think that it's a lot easier to live life not believing in a God, because I don't have to hold to, biblical morality or anything like that, which is a loose term anyway, because depending on which books you read, it's one way or it could be a totally different thing. Yeah. Oh, that brings me to the one question that I think somebody actually did ask for us to talk about was like meaning and morality, which is a pretty common question that I see online, but it's not a question that I've really gotten asked myself a lot. Like where I derive meaning from. You as a more agnostic believer, where do you get your morality from? Because
What are you asking, like, you know, in a roundabout way, like, can you have morals in the absence of religion?
Well, obviously, I think you can.
Yeah,
I think that everyone gets their morality from, you know, the society that they live in.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I think it's wherever like on the map you are, like you're gonna abide by those morals. And I mean, the backbone of it could have been instilled by like a religion of that area or whatever. But I think at the core of it, even on a most primal, like, because we're animals at the end of the day, I think there's a system of morals that exists within all of us that we're gonna subscribe to regardless of religion or where you live or whatever. I mean, it's generally frowned upon no matter where you go to just senselessly murder people. You know, I mean, there's it's across the board. There's things that like just human beings subscribe to. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to get a lot of disagreement there. I think so many people think that they derive their morality from their religion, that as soon as someone abandons that or just doesn't really, you know, have an opinion on it or doesn't really care, you know, that question gets asked, like, well, how do you know what's right and wrong? It's like, how do you know what's right and wrong? Like, forget the book. How do you know what's right and wrong? Like, if you were to find out, and this is another common rebuttal to that question, is like, if you were to find out tomorrow that everything that your religion taught is bogus, would you then start, you know, murdering and raping people? I mean, no is the most common answer. You know, it's like, of course I wouldn't. And you know, and I have murdered and raped exactly as many people as I want to.
Zero.
And it's zero. You know, that doesn't change. You know, it allows for things that the Bible condemns, for me to be able to evaluate them without that kind of stigma. The LGBT community kind of question, like, where do you stand with regards to gay rights or transgender rights and all that kind of thing? I can evaluate that, you know, forgetting that the Bible exists. I can evaluate that on, well, what do I think about that? What do I know about that? It's like, if it was a choice, I still wouldn't have a problem with it, you know, because why would that be a problem? Because it's, to me, the question comes down to, is everyone involved a consenting adult? If so, then
what's the issue?
Do whatever you want, you know, get crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, the question of, like, even going to, like, polyamory and stuff like that, like, yeah, if everyone involved is okay with it, then fine. Have a you know, have 2 wives or, you know, 3 husbands or whatever, however you want to do it.
It's interesting that you bring that up in general, because that's something I was pondering on the other day, of just monogamy as a whole. And I wonder if religion had never been a thing, would we be a monogamous species? Well,
I mean, if you look back at the beginning of the Bible, it wasn't monogamous then.
Oh, really?
No, I mean, if you look back in the Old Testament, like King Solomon, the wisest man in the Bible, you know, because he, you know, asked God for wisdom when he could have asked him for anything. He had something like 300 wives and 800 concubines.
Damn.
Like, it wasn't, there wasn't monogamy. It wasn't one man, one woman until, you know, fairly recently, even in biblical standpoint. I mean, another one of the, I think, I want to say it's Jacob, I might be totally wrong, wanted to marry Ruth or Rachel. I don't remember the story well enough. Anyway, one character in the Bible wanted to marry this other man's daughter. And so the guy was like, work for me for 7 years and I'll let you marry her. So he worked for him for 7 years, and then they had a wedding, and then on the wedding night he finds out it was this girl's older sister. So he went back and he was like, hey, what is this all about? And he's like, well, she was older. She had to get married first. So work for me for 7 more years and I'll let you marry the other one.
Damn, hard
so he worked for 7 more years and married the other one. because that was okay. It was okay to have multiple wives. The rule of it was like a man can have as many wives as he can afford to have in his house, essentially. Like that was the way that it was.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was so. If a Christian ever is like marriage is supposed to be one man, one woman, it's like, well, the Bible didn't say that. It's
So where did that string start, do you think? Because obviously it wasn't like a biblical thing. It was.
I don't really know.
A societal thing, maybe.
I mean, I'm not real sure.
Because that's the whole argument with Christianity is the sanctity of marriage, and So I'm just curious.
Just read the Old Testament and you realize that the sanctity of marriage was not. It wasn't then what it is today, for sure. There's lots of horrible laws that they had in the Old Testament in Leviticus that just, the most egregious one to me is if a man like finds a woman in a field and rapes her and she was a virgin, all he has to do is go to her father and pay her father 30 pieces of silver, and then she's now his wife and she can't divorce him. It's like, how is that ever a good thing? How is that ever a law that people were like, okay, that makes sense? Yeah. And thinking that came down from an all-knowing, all-loving creator that, he set things in motion with that thing in mind. Like, no, that's disgusting. And
then to think that people who subscribe to that are like going to question morals at any point.
Right.
It's like kind of backwards.
The way that a lot of people get around those laws is they say, when Jesus came and died, he set a new covenant, and that's, the New Testament is really what matters. The stuff in the Old Testament doesn't matter. But then you get to the problem of, well, you still shouldn't judge gay people negatively because nowhere in the New Testament does it talk about that except for like maybe once. All of those laws are in with the Leviticus laws where you're not supposed to wear like a cotton poly, blend. That's it's ridiculous laws like that are in the Old Testament, and these anti-gay laws are mingled in with them. It's real crazy. I think that most Christians don't really get their morality from the Bible. The easiest way to see that is to ask one Christian what they believe about morals, and then to go to another one and ask them the same question. And if there's any difference, then they're not getting it from the same place.
Right.
Or at least somebody's not being serious about it. And I guess that may be the argument that they would make is like, well, one of them actually believes the right thing, the other one doesn't. I don't subscribe to that, but
that's one thing that's always confused me about the branch, or like Christianity as a whole, is like the different branches of it. Maybe you can explain it to me, how there's like Church of God and Baptist and all these other, but they all fall under the same umbrella of Christianity. So what is the...
Yeah, I don't know. That's something else that I kind of wanted to make a little video about. You could talk about just all the different Protestant sects of Christianity, because you get Baptists and Methodists and Episcopalians, and all these different people believe slightly different things, but they all believe that they all believe in the Bible, but not everyone believes that the Bible is like 100% flawless. Mm-hmm. So it just comes down to the differences in what they believe about the Bible. Because, if you go to a Baptist church and you go to a Methodist church, you probably won't see much different. Mm-hmm. But if you go from a Methodist church to a Catholic church, you'll probably notice quite a few differences there in those services and just kind of what they're talking about. And I don't know. I don't know where all of the differences came from, but I think it's just a product of the fact that everyone kind of has their own belief. Mm-hmm. And, if you gain a large enough following, you have a new church, essentially. So, and you see, to an even larger extent, now that I'm reading this book about the things that didn't make it into the New Testament. There are other gospels out there written by different people that, recorded things totally differently. And they were written by people that, had a church. So they had a church where they were preaching this gospel. So it kind of makes sense that as time goes on, different people believing slightly different things, they have to form their own group that's separate from the others. The sad part is that most of the people that would probably get along under normal circumstances, just because someone's Catholic and we're Baptists, we can't really hang out with them because they are going to go to hell. That's what I was always taught. It's like, well, Catholics are going to hell because they don't believe the right thing.
But they all believe the same God, though, don't they?
Right. It's all of these tiny little differences, they add up. And then, different people are going to draw the line in different places, because Catholics, of course, still believe that, Jesus came down and died for our sins, and, that for most people, accepting that Jesus did that is the way that you get saved, and that's how you, ensure that you're going to make it to heaven. So different people are going to draw the lines in different places. Like, well, but they believe in, a literal transformation of the cracker and the wine. We view that as a more symbolic gesture. There's all these different differences that, add up, and they drive these wedges in between people who believe almost the same thing.
Right.
It's...
Where's the line drawn between, like, a cult and a religion? What is the deciding factor on that?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I've seen a lot of people talk about, is this or is this not a cult, when talking about Mormons or Scientologists or Jehovah's Witnesses or things like that. The best thing that I can do is to recommend you to those channels, because they talk about it and they know what they're talking about.
Right.
GM Skeptic, or Genetically Modified Skeptic, is one of my favorite channels on YouTube, especially right now. He's just, his videos are relatively short. Some of them are in the 5-minute range. They go up to 15, 20 minutes sometimes. But he, he'll take on a different topic in each video, and he does his research. Mm-hmm. He's really good. His name's also Drew, so that doesn't hurt. Nice. But he comes from a background where his family got really big into, like the essential oils thing. Oh. Yeah. And I think the most recent video, I was listening to this the other day. I drive a lot for work, so when I'm driving, I'll pull up a YouTube playlist and just hit go and just listen to it. And a lot of those types of channels are really good for that, because I don't have to pay attention to what's on the screen, because obviously I'm driving, I can't do that. But he did one where he talks about how the essential oils thing that he was briefly a part of, and that his family was, and I think still is, a part of. I think it's like New Living or New Life or something like that. He's like, yeah, this is a cult. It really is. And then he goes down, like, there's I think it's called a bite model that somebody else recently came up with, and it just lists, different bullet points. It's like, these things, contribute to this ideology being a cult. And he was able to check off enough of those that he's like, yeah, it really is a cult.
That's bizarre.
And he's, let's see, another channel, Cosmic Skeptic, interviewed a friend of his that is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And that one, for sure, like, is definitely a cult. Like, there's no question in my mind that is a cult. And I think Telltale Atheist is another channel that talks about it a lot. I haven't watched as many of his videos. He's one of the channels that, like, he'll have, like, just artwork kind of drawing itself on the screen while he talks about different things. And he's talked about cults a lot, because he is, let's see, he might also be an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Or I think it's ex-Jehovah's Witness. I might be wrong. I'll fix that in the description or something. Right. But yeah, basically, I mean, from what I can tell, it comes down to, are they controlling over who you interact with? Mm-hmm. That's a big point. Do they have a lot of, are they like anti-outsider? Like, you can't be around these people. Are they extremely negative to people who leave the group? Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that you definitely get with groups like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. Is like if you leave, like you can't talk to your family again.
Yeah.
Like it's, they cut you out. They pretend you don't exist. Like it's crazy. So that's another big one. As far as what they believe religiously, I don't think that gets that's as important into trying to determine if something is a cult or not. Because I think if you were to go back far enough, or just take a step away and view any religion from the outside, you would realize that some of the things that any religion believes are pretty ridiculous. Not quite as ridiculous as believing that a convicted con man found gold tablets that he didn't show to anyone and knew how to read them, even though they were written in Egyptian or New Egyptian or something like that, a language that doesn't exist. He claimed he was able to read these tablets because God inspired him to be able, or an angel inspired him to be able to read these tablets, and then he wrote it down. And there's Mormonism. It's like, that's what they believe. That's part of what they believe, is that this literally convicted con man created a religion, and they're like, oh yeah, well, he was a con man then, but he was right about this stuff.
But that's the thing. I mean, if you pull back far enough, I mean, they're all like on the same level of ridiculousness. And that's where I was going with the cult thing, is again, if you pull the scope back far enough, all religions seem kind of culty. Like every one of them. Yeah.
I mean, there's certain aspects of pretty much any denomination that you can think of that do resemble a cult. I would be surprised if most religions didn't start out as some sort of a cult. I mean, that kind of just makes sense. One TV show, I don't know if you've seen The Path.
Yeah.
With Aaron Paul. Yeah. That's like all about, him being a part of a cult. I mean, it really is a cult. You see, they're on their little campus, and they don't really like it when people leave the campus and do other things. I mean, and then as the cult starts to grow, they have to break some of their rules, and they have to bend, different things and find new revelations and things like that so they can start expanding. I'm not really sure where the show's headed. I don't know what kind of the point. Oh, they canceled it.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Well, that last season was not very good.
Yeah, it wasn't as good as the others for sure. Yeah. It really seemed like they were going to turn this into a more supernatural, like, but this stuff's actually real, and now we're going to start seeing the end times and stuff like that. And I was like, I love sci-fi. I love all that kind of stuff. So I was really excited, and then just nothing ever happened with it really. So that was kind of a bummer. But yeah, that show was a really good insight into seeing like what it is like to be inside of a cult, and then to have them vehemently grow a little bit, and you get to see what happens there. I enjoyed the show while I was watching it.
I just love Aaron Paul.
He was great. He was fantastic in the show. It was a really good cast. I didn't find any acting performances to be all that bad. But yeah, I'm not really an expert in cult. I'm not an expert in any of this. It's just, I think it's fun to talk about and to do a little research on. I don't know. I don't know where the differences are, but I would be surprised if most, if not all, religions at least started out as cults. Yeah. Because that kind of makes sense.
It seems like it. I'll have to do like independent research into like what where the separation is. Yeah.
I don't think it's a fine line either. Like so many things, it's not like cut and dry. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've talked a lot here in the past little bit. Fine. Tell me more about your podcast and kind of what you want to get done with that, because I'm curious.
Well, Breadcrumbs for me, in the same way that I feel like your channel sort of started, is just a way to like connect with like-minded people. I live in like a state of existential dread, and it never leaves me. And I just want to know more about whatever. And I like doing stuff like this, just like sort of picking people's brains, and and like I said, if it were up to me, I think it would be cool to just like run experiments on people, be it social or whatever, and just track the results. So the next best thing for me was just like having people come in and sit down and have a conversation about whatever sparks their interest. Like we did the one about like personal identity. Mm-hmm. My friend Andrew came on for that, and he's in the LGBT community. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. And then space, because who doesn't think about that, you know? Yeah. And then I'm going to have you on for religion and stuff, and I'm sure we'll rehash a lot of this. But
yeah, at least some of it, I'm sure.
So and there's really, so for me it was just a way to sort of dissect things that get stuck in my head, because I find myself getting stuck on, I'll just loop on these same thoughts over and over, like fucking space, man, and I just need to sit down and dump it all out with someone, look at it, and we can compartmentalize it and put it back.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. I like the idea. There's a few podcasts out there that I really like listening to, but the whole podcast idea is really neat. And it's one thing, I mean, this video is going to be an example of that. I can spew forth some things that I think for 5 to 10 minutes every, couple of weeks probably, but the stuff that I really like listening to is the discussions and the really intense, like the long discussions about a topic. Mm-hmm. And a 5-minute, 10-minute video is not really going to cut it. So hopefully there's an audience out there for it, because I've talked to a friend of mine, Philip Scroggin. He was the first person that I got to do like a long discussion with. And we just did a Skype call because he doesn't live here anymore. And then I had a really long conversation with a friend of mine from college who now lives in Atlanta. And I really want to get him on here. Hopefully that one can be another one of these where we just sit down in here and talk. Hopefully it isn't another one of those Skype calls if I can avoid it, just because there's a lot that can go wrong there, and it's a little bit less personal that way. Yeah. I like these sit downs a lot better. So hopefully I can start doing more of these. I don't think that this will be like an every week kind of thing or every 2 week kind of thing, but just whenever I can get somebody in that we can talk about stuff, because
I'd like to see
really
like you have friends probably who are still like you said, you had healthy debates with people who are still identify as religious, maybe have one of them come on and have one of those debates, that'd be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely what the Philip Scroggin talk was about, because he is a Christian, and he's really into like apologetics, so arguing, for religion. It's not like it sounds. Apologetics isn't them apologizing. It's, it's how they make arguments. So he came forward when I made the atheist versus agnostic video, and he was like, hey, I'd really be interested in having a talk with you about this. I was like, do you mind if we film it? I'd be really interested to see what other people thought about what we think. I guess that may be a little egotistical to think that people are actually interested in what I have to say about different things, but
no, I feel the same way with the podcast. Like,
if people want to watch this, great. If they don't, then great.
It's therapeutic either way.
It's nice for me to be able to talk about that. For me, So you just decided that you wanted to do that kind of a podcast thing. I know a little bit about you personally through our mutual friends. We have some friends that I think you've been to like a couple of the Solomon's Ghost shows or something. So we've probably met in person a couple of times before, but I think this is the first time that we've actually sat down, and certainly the first time that we've had a talk of this caliber for sure. But tell me a little bit more about you and about just how you came about not really believing in any one religion, and maybe a little bit more about like spirituality, because maybe that's the right question to ask. I know a lot of people say, I'm not really religious, but I'm spiritual. What does that question mean to you? And then how would you answer it if I were to ask you, are you a spiritual person?
I think in the phrase, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, that's going to vary so much person to person. Yeah. And to me, like, the idea of spirituality, it's a very personal how you connect with people, how you connect with nature, with the universe in general, you know, and it's such a broad thing. For me, personally, it sounds really dumb to say, but every time I think about the universe and the way everything sort of works, I don't necessarily believe in like a karma system necessarily, but there definitely seems to be a certain order to nature, and even like on a physics standpoint, like energy can't be created or destroyed; it's just there and it's, you know, whatever. And so for me, that's sort of the thing that I subscribe to is that there is some sort of order in all of this, and it's just finding my part in it. And that's where that existential dread comes from, is because I think growing up in like I said, not necessarily a religious household, but spiritual, I guess, with some like religious influence, you know, I think it's easy to sort of think, well, I have a purpose because God created me and my purpose is X, and, you know, it's easier for you to find that meaning in life. But whenever you reject that idea or you don't subscribe to it, you are sort of just left floating, and you have to sort of accept, like, maybe there is no grand purpose for all of this. I'm just a person who happened to be alive on this long timeline of everything, you know. And it's hard. It's another hard pill to swallow because, like I said before, I think human ego wants us to believe that we're so important and everything we do matters greatly, and after we die, there's going to be something else after this. And so, I'm big enough to admit that, like, I'm still battling with that, you know. But I think for me, that's what spirituality comes down to is just my personal connection with everything around me.
Is there any sort of supernatural element to that, or is it more like for me, I can dumb it down to like a biology perspective, like the fact that we know that, you know, all life evolved on Earth, or at least the best understanding that we have right now is that all life evolved on Earth from the same starting point.
Right.
To the best of our knowledge, it did. And that grew to be everything that lives on the planet. So technically, if you go back far enough, you and I are related at some point. If you go back farther, me and the cat in the living room are related. If you go back farther, me and the grass that's in my yard is related. So, you know, there is an interconnectedness certainly with all life on Earth, because we all come from the same, like, genetic, you know, biologic starting point. And that's just really cool to think about, because even if you read the Bible literally, you know, everything was created separately. So there isn't that interconnectedness. Whereas biologically, it is all connected. And whether it started on Earth or whether, you know, there was some biological seed that came from an asteroid from Mars or something like that,
right,
and that's what started life on Earth. At least all life on Earth seems to be all connected, which is crazy to think that, you know, me and dinosaurs are related if you go back far enough.
Right.
So that's a purely, like, biological look at it. Like, it's neat to see that we're all related, and that kind of helps too with, like, wanting to preserve the Earth. It's like, because you know, that's my cousin over there, you know. It's, you know, and helps a little bit with morality. You know, I don't want to hurt things that can feel hurt. You know, I'm not a vegan or a vegetarian, so there's things that I could certainly improve if I really wanted to stand by that statement. But just that kind of interconnectedness, I can really understand. And then you can go back to, like, the Carl Sagan "we're all stardust,"
right,
you know, statement, and that's really cool to think, like, that the birth of our star is probably what formed the atoms that make up my body. Like, that's crazy to think about. Or that, you know, some star somewhere died so that, you know, all of us could live. kind of thing. That's that kind of an interconnectedness I can see. And I know Sam Harris is a really big name because he's a neuroscientist and an atheist, and he talks about it a lot, so he's pretty prominent, very well spoken. But he also he has a podcast called Waking Up, but he also has a meditation app that he's developed. So he, for him, spirituality, it's kind of a weird word to use because he doesn't believe in ethereal spirits,
right?
But kind of meditation and really kind of taking stock of yourself and with the relationships that you have, and all of that can be really beneficial, but he just doesn't think that there's a supernatural aspect to it. Right. So I'm wondering where you would fall on that.
No, I absolutely as you were describing it's just the biological standpoint of everything. That's exactly where I fall. And I think for me, what makes me inclined to lean more towards any kind of supernatural thing is I get fucked up about consciousness. And you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's a weird, hard thing to grapple with, that I'm a consciousness in a body. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And the brain figuring itself out, and growing up, that's how my mom explained it, was you're a soul in a body, mm-hmm. and that's what's piloting everything, So I think as I got older, that's what it boiled down to me, was just trying to understand what consciousness is and what it's fucking doing up there and what to do with it, Yeah. So and I don't know if you would call it a supernatural thing, but it's a hard thing to break down and explain.
I don't think I don't know. I haven't run across anyone yet that has come up with really a good explanation for or maybe not a good explanation, but maybe a good definition for what is consciousness. How are we conscious? Because the only experience that we have is the one that we've got. Yeah. I don't know what it's like to be a chimpanzee. Mm-hmm. Are they conscious? At what level are they conscious? Yeah. They may not be able to feel all of the emotions that we can feel. Yeah. And if there's aliens out there that are way more advanced than we are, evolutionarily speaking, can they feel emotions that we can't even imagine? Mm-hmm. Things like that. Where do we stand, and how the brain works is still largely a mystery, and it's really interesting to think that how the brain works is how I'm conscious. Mm-hmm. And it's weird to think about that. Yeah,
self-awareness in itself is just it's the brain becoming aware of itself, and it's just this weird loop, and mm-hmm. it's easy to get stuck in.
Yeah.
And I think whenever you break down religion is, I don't feel like you can argue religion without going back to the philosophy of everything, and that's what religion does, is it's sort of this blanket statement of well, this is why we're conscious, because God, and mm-hmm. It doesn't answer the question to me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's where I fall with that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I've not really talked about that specifically with anyone. So it's interesting to hear somebody that I've never really talked to have kind of virtually the same kind of understanding. Yeah. Because I don't really know where I would stand on the whole spiritual, because obviously, I don't believe in spirits of any kind, but I understand, that the mind is not fully understood, and that we can have experiences that we may not yet be able to understand. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that, just because I'm not religious doesn't mean that I can't have crazy, wild experiences. Right. I know, a lot of people have in the past and do now experiment with LSD and things where you go into an alternate understanding of time, kind of, mm-hmm. Crazy weird things happen when you're tripping on certain drugs. And it's fascinating that a chemical plus your brain can do crazy things. Yeah. And, it helps kind of, I guess, understand that the brain's pretty crazy as is. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of experiences that you can have that I think are, not believing in a supernatural realm. I don't think that really takes away from it. I can still be awe-inspired by pieces of music or by a movie or, things like that, like, or, works of art, and understanding that it's a process of my brain. I don't think that takes away any of that wonder. If anything, it adds to it. It's like, I'm only able to understand this because my brain's really complicated. Yeah. That's so much cooler than thinking that I just popped into existence, God said it and now we've got humans. Thinking of the process that led to me being able to experience the things that I can experience is just so cool.
Yeah.
So crazy. Yeah. I don't know. There's so much more that we could talk about, but we probably should wrap things up here shortly. So I guess we'll give one more plug for your podcast and let people know where they can find it, and we'll go from there.
Brain Crumbs. I'm on all the iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and all that. Just Brain Crumbs podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all there.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm on not the next recording, but the one right after that. Is that right?
Actually, I think things got moved around. I think you are going to be on the next one. Well, not the next recording. I have an episode about to come out, but you'll be on the next recording.
Gotcha. So I'll be episode 4.
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, check it out. She's got 2 episodes out right now. And then a little short, not an episode thing. But it's just people talking about shit. So it's pretty cool. I'll be on there in a couple weeks, and who knows, we may have more of these conversations in the future.
Yeah.
I'm certainly open to it.
I've enjoyed it. It's been nice picking your brain.
This has been really fun. I feel like I've talked too much, but maybe we can remedy that in the future with some more of me asking questions instead of long-winded answers.
No, it's been fun. I feel like I learned a lot. I took a lot from it. So
good. Maybe that's a beneficial part. Anyway, so thank you guys for watching. As always, like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and you can also support me on Patreon. I've also got a Facebook and a Twitter that gets used occasionally, so all of the links to that are going to be in the description, and I will see you guys next time.